All right. Okay, so we are live. It is MSC 624, Managing People in Tech Environment. It is September 6th, the fall 27th term. Welcome, everybody. Glad we're here. We got, it looks like we've got 2 live, 3 streaming, or 2 streaming, and 1 who's going to pick it up async. So it's a nice balance of everybody. Again, it's Lauren. It's your first rodeo with me. Derek and Q saw you guys in the spring, and Chris, you and I had a class together for a brief moment. We'll do another week and do this one going through. So I'm glad you're all here, and those of you who had me before, you kind of know how the drill works for the class. This one's this class was in the spring. It's a little bit different cadence than the spring one. The spring one was very external speaker heavy. This one is going to have a different kind of a tone to it, but the general operation's the same. But glad you're all here. Just get a feel of things. So, Lauren, what term are you? How far into the grad program are you?
Completed 1 classes.
Okay, so all right, cool. And Q, you're getting about.
Yeah, I've done 2 semesters. So
Okay.
It's like 4 classes.
All right. And Derek, you're getting pretty close based on your conversation. Yeah.
I'm still in the
Okay.
first half. This will only be my 4th class.
Okay. And Chris, you're moving along pretty soon. So that's pretty cool. Okay. So you're all different places. Well, glad you're here. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to focus up. We're going to kind of get some operational things taken care of the class. On the back end tonight, what we're going to do is we'll talk through just how the class navigates and how it works and things like that, what to expect and whatnot. But I want to get going into the class itself. For those of you who are kind of following along on the stream, I have the PDF deck up. For those of you who aren't on the stream, like Lauren, yeah, with my classes.
I actually get onto the stream with my tablet, so.
You can grab the PDF. I'll have a typical thing for the class is I'll usually have the deck done just ahead of class. I'll upload the PDF so you can follow it that way. So that way you're here, you don't have to burn the bandwidth of just having to watch the stream to follow along. And we may occasionally pause from while we're in a video and you know everybody on the streaming side to go and watch a video. But you'll find in the class that the modules are going to have tons of resources in them ahead of time. Like what's in this module right now for the introduction to the course, the other ones are going to populate about this deep out by the middle of next week. And so there's going to be tons of material here, and we'll talk about that. And what we'll do tonight is we'll talk through all that stuff, like how the outline works, what you can expect, how the assignments work, what's the first assignment, all those kind of things. We'll navigate all of that probably in the back 20 or 30 of the class. And so, as those of you who've done the class before, we'll just bear with. But that's what we'll get to do. So hopefully by the end of today, you got a pretty good sense of how the class works, what it takes to succeed, what we're trying to accomplish with it, yeah, and all that kind of good stuff. But let's go ahead and let's just hop into it. Okay, so for those of you who had me in the spring course, like the spring course was sort of the how do you build a startup kind of course. And that had a certain kind of, it's a very, actually in a lot of ways, it's a very technical kind of course. There's some specific skill sets I wanted to work you through, and that's good. Those of you who have had me in my leading change course, in there's a series of toolkits we're going to work our way through. And in some ways, that course is a little bit more like this. This course is really about the topic of leadership, and we're going to cover it in a bunch of different flavors. And the interesting thing about leadership, first of all, leadership is incredibly interesting. Because it is at the same time science. There is hard science underneath it, but there's an awful lot of artistry to it, and it is something that I've been futzing around with leadership now for like 3 decades, and it has never, probably the analogy I can make vaguely is like, when you hear about golfers talk about their game. And they do like, hey, you just always get better at it forever. There's no point where you level out. You just keep going, refining your game. Leadership is one of those kind of skill sets where, the kind of things you do at different phases in your career change and you refine your skills constantly. And I think it's really interesting that when you look around right now and just track videos on YouTube or wherever, and I see these guys who I've been watching as leaders in organizations for 30, 40, 50 years, and they're in their 60s or 70s, and they're still doing it. I mean, they're not just academics talking, they're still in the game. And it's people kind of learning about leadership is that there's a lot of growth associated with it, and you can take on different roles, and you just kind of get better at it until your brain just finally just stops working. And so it makes the topic really interesting, but also it isn't. I can remember, my background started in comp sci, and I did comp sci for a while. And by the time I was a grad student, I'd had 2 tech companies, and neither of which succeeded. One succeeded a little bit more than the other did. But like my first tech company lasted for about 3 years, and it was a consulting business and just programming app development kind of stuff. And then I came onto UAT when it was a startup. I was like when it started, when I was here, I was like employee 6 kind of thing, and employees 4 and 5 were gone, and so although I guess I started off in the teaching side of the gig here, I moved into leadership administration for a long time. And so, if you've been in UAT for a while, so what I've talked about in my previous classes is that we are a higher education kind of institution, but in our DNA has always been this point of view that we operate like a tech company. And so what I've noticed, so from my point, I've been doing tech leadership for the majority of my life, and the knowledge when I first started out in this, what was funny is I never thought I would land here because I really wanted. My background was coding is like terrifically fun. It was the 80s. It was when code was breaking out, this whole blue sky kind of area where you're writing what you had written before. And oddly, at that point in time, a lot of leaders were cheesy. I mean, it was like the archetype of the Dilberts or the Office Space and all that kind of stuff was really rampant back then, and it was just like oh man, I did not want to be this guy with a matching belt and shoes, which oddly I'm wearing today. But essentially, it struck me as kind of a weird field to be in. And what happened was over time, as industry in the U.S. particularly got more refined, leadership got more refined. And so somewhere it changed. And interestingly, a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next class is about what we've learned about leadership, especially in the last 30 or 40 years, which has kind of changed the game of it. And it has moved away from being something that was just unrefined to something that's gotten quite interesting. And so what we're going to do in this class, we're going to talk about leadership and what it's about. It's this whole class, and begin. I'm kind of teasing a little bit. There's going to be a moment I'm going to get down to the nuts and bolts of what the outcomes of the class are. But I want to think about, or I want you guys to start thinking about, why do we study leadership? And as I alluded before, this class is a little bit different from other classes because this is going to be a much more conversational class because the topics warrant it. There's going to be a lot of structure and a lot of material to read, but you have to kind of digest it and talk about it, and then you're going to have to practice it. And we'll talk about that when we get to the assignment phase of the game. But class. And so to begin with, I kind of want to I'm going to open up with all of you and say, all right, why? Why put leadership into a curriculum at a tech school?
Well, there's a lot of technical aspects to it, right? So, it also is a necessary component of owning a business or operating a business.
Yep, it's true. There are some things, like when we talked about in the tech startup class in the spring, there were things that were in that if you just didn't do them right, you weren't going to succeed operationally. Your business is going to survive. But if the leadership isn't together, the organization's not going to survive. And something that's interesting with this class, I think, is that when we talk about leadership, there's this weird place that we're typically folks who are in grad programs, or certainly certain people from undergrad programs, when they talk about leadership class, what happens is there's this reality that, like, look, you don't graduate from a bachelor's degree and suddenly they make you a manager. That doesn't play. What happens is you're going to find in your near horizon, you're either going to be start your own company, which inherently becomes leadership, in which case all of these lessons become relevant, or you're going to start off as just a person doing a role, and if you're at all successful within 12 to 24 months, you're going to find yourself in a team leadership kind of role. And then these things come in again. And so there's a relevance to the course this way. But the thing is, in either case, in terms of organizational success or team success, if you don't know, like how to do leadership, you're going to fail, and there's a reason for that. And if you check out the chat line on the side, Derek, you're right. There's a really cool point you're making here about how is changing around us, and one of the truths out there, and some of the videos that you're going to see linked through in the resource, you're going to see people talk about this, that a thing about leadership is it forces you to constantly grow and change, partly because the nature of the economy and the workforce is changing, but also as you're working with organizations, you're going to tend to work with organizations of different sort of sizes and shapes. And so you've got to always grow it and skill it. And so learning how to be good at leadership is worthwhile. And really what we're going to get out of this class is a couple of things. One is sort of the an awareness of sort of the base pieces of leadership. From a cooking perspective, like there is, there are the mother sauces. If you cook it all. Any guys cook it all? All right. Usually my references, by the way, are either sports or cooking, and a lot of times with an audience that doesn't know either, and so it gets tough. However, Professor Bellinger from General Education here, his wife cooks and he's big on sports. So I can talk about anything with him. But anyway, there's the mother sauces. The thing about mother sauces when you cook is that there's one of them is a white sauce, a bechamel, and the other one is a red sauce. And the thing is, you learn those base sauces. And they are not inherently all that awe-inspiring of themselves, but they're the base skill set that you then add your flavorings into, and everything else comes out of that. Like a roux is actually what I consider one of the mother sauces. Roux, which is the basis of gumbo and stuff like that. Well, this leadership course is going to be that way, where I'm going to talk about some of the base aspects of leadership. All of them are going to have a profound amount of depth and nuance to them, but that's good. I like that. Derek, they all can be expanded on, but it's good to know these basic piece parts to it. The other aspect of the course that we study leadership on is fundamentally that you need to understand that organizations need leaders. Fundamentally, it's just kind of one of those truths, and that's why we talk about leadership. Is that the humans, for whatever reason, and once we get past just working by ourselves, have a need for leadership. And organizations and people require them. One of the videos you're going to see in the shell, and it is the one that is marked, it's one of the Simon Sinek videos, and it's the one associated with the next week. It talks about Simon Sinek and how great leaders provide sense of safety. Good video. Simon Sinek is an interesting fellow in the TED Talk space. He got in early with TED Talks, and so he got like a huge number of hits originally, and so he became kind of a phenomenon. I am not entirely certain he has a whole lot of like resume besides being one of the first guys in the TED Talks, but a few of his videos really are solid about leadership. And what he talks about in that second video is this idea that when humans get together, we will self-organize, and somebody will take charge. Now he does it out of this sort of whoever the strongest person is, very tribal, which may or may not be super relevant right now, but it probably was how it played out back when we were in caves. But now, if you get a group of people together and you say, hey, I'm going to form a company, or I'm going to form an endeavor, or I'm going to do something like that, one thing is going to happen. Either someone is going to emerge as a leader, or everybody's going to try and be a parallel, and the organization is going to fail. Because the thing about leadership is at some point in time in endeavors, somebody absolutely has to be in charge. I think we talked a bit about this last spring. someone has to be in, we talk about in the context of ownership, but you need to have somebody who owns the overall direction, you know, and you know, people talk about, you know, the idea of like, well, what about if it's just, you know, a peer collective? It doesn't work. By and large, a lot of the, you know, the golden circle. Yes, yeah, that's a very good presentation. You know, whenever we work in collectives, people tend to run cross purposes, and they just run misaligned. You just eventually humans require. We're you know, if we're a hive mentality, we might be able to do something differently. But as humans, we need to have someone who is in charge. And I've yet to find a model of humanity that has sustained that works another way. If we're, you know, over dinner, we can sit down and talk with each other and not have somebody in charge. Try to get something done, someone's got to be in charge. And what's interesting about it is that usually people self-select.
It's natural. So,
right.
Like if you just throw a bunch of people together and say, hey, we're make this, you know, eventually everyone's going to kind of settle into what they're going to do, and then one person's going to take the overall direction.
You know, you think about it. Have any of you read the history of Steve Jobs in the early days of Apple? They're going to get back to that. Have you read the history of Steve Jobs and Apple?
No.
Okay. Some of it. Okay. Some of it, forgotten most of it. Me too. I understand how that plays. They talk about the early days of Apple. I mean, when they began, it was a bunch of engineers in the garage, more or less. It's him and Woz and other folks. And Steve was originally a tech guy, but he eventually took over that role. And there was this moment, and it was kind of an awkward moment where he realized if we're going to go someplace, we have to get past the commune view, and someone has to go ahead and make sales and set direction of the organization and do some things like that. And that is what just tends to emerge. If it doesn't emerge, they tend to fall apart. Or what you'll see often in companies is that they don't. If you get a group of people who are just completely good working at the same level, they realize they're not making progress, and they'll hire somebody to come in. You know, they'll say, we need someone to actually run the shop. That is not uncommon at all.
When you don't have a leader too, it's harder to make a decision.
Yeah.
Say yes or no, and everybody's got their ideas, but if there's nobody who is like the green light or thumbs down, you kind of are just, well, who's going to choose here? All of us, or?
And that's it. I mean, have you ever sat in a committee meeting where everybody is just like circling around and around because no one actually is running the meeting and saying, hey, it's time to make a decision? You know, I have it. They're terrible. You do it. And something you said is really interesting, Lauren, like that notion of we have a tendency to gut check. That is an interesting, that's a human behavior that people will look around naturally to see, is there somebody, like, did I say something, who's in charge, and did I say something that lines up with it? And there have been some interesting studies, if you go on a geek out of sociology, that, you know, you could argue that for humans in our culture, well, we've been raised in it, so is it maybe just part of the culture we're raised in that we do those kind of behaviors? You know, I would say to it, doesn't matter because it's where we are. But there's been some really cool studies done in situations that don't have quite the level of hierarchical structure that we've got in our society, and it then you know, they still require it. It doesn't work otherwise. And again, you're right, Derek. It's like yeah, you've got to have someone to call. And I think what you said about that is right. Where at some point in time, you either need someone who's going to make a decision, or you need to have somebody who sets up the rules by which decisions are made and is there as kind of like a tiebreaker, or at least as the mitigator when you really can't get the consensus. Because there are forms of leadership that are based on facilitation of consensus. You know, you get people together and say we're going to get as many people around and make a decision. But you can't have a committee. Like if you have a committee to set the grounds for the committee, which it just good point. When you have leadership, there's times when it's okay to spend months deliberating, but there's times you just got to go. You know, and it's you know, if there's a fire going on, it's not appropriate time to get a group of people together and have a good conversation. What's the best approach to fight the fire? You need someone to say, all right, you grab buckets, you call the fire department, you get the kids out. Yeah, and Derek, this is a couple statements back about the notion of the loudest, which is similar to the strongest, is not the best choice. And yeah, I think it's low. I think he means loudest on that. That is an interesting pattern that I kind of agree. We see it with some of the internet culture and the trolling culture. And what I wonder about with that is, that's not really leadership. It's just whoever's loud. And I wonder sometimes if we're going to work our way through it. But when we get to personality profiles and behavioral profiles and motivators, part of the reason why that works is that there's the largest chunk of humanity, statistically, it represents 50-60% of humanity, have a strong tendency towards, when faced with someone who is just loud and boisterous, they don't want to put the energy into the conflict, and so they just abdicate. And that is not good, because what happens in the decision-making process is you lose. It's like you can have 50-60% of your perspectives be really solid perspectives, and they just shut down because someone's loud. The thing about that, loud and strong in most cases of our site are not necessarily leaderly. But I can get some modifiers to it. If you changed strong to confident, that I would say is true.
I mean, a strong leader is good, but that's not the only thing you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes strong just means to get the nuance of the word. People will say, "Are they a strong leader?" And we talk about leadership in those terms.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think what Derek was aiming at here, he said just being loud means just basically the most alpha. And that's not what you're looking for. In fact, most successful leadership going on right now wouldn't work that way. Because what I would say is leaders need to have a high degree of confidence. And that's the interesting thing. Leaders who lose confidence struggle because of something that I believe Derek said, which someone has to make a call, good or bad. And the nature of leadership is you're going to make some bad calls. But you've got to have confidence to kind of know and go out and do it again. It's a bit like, here comes a sports analogy, great pitchers, they have bad innings. What makes a characteristic people talk about with pitchers is that they have some inner thing inside of them that knows, yep, I threw a bad pitch and we lost a run, we lose the game, I'm going to throw another pitch, and that event is in the past.
That's the louder thing, on the football field too. Like
right.
Somebody who's the loudest might not be the leader. He might not be the one who knows
right.
the calls and has the confidence to run the team on the field. He just might be really loud.
And that's a great, actually, I think the football analogy works really well in leadership because quarterback truly is a leader of what's going on in the context of they're probably not the best athlete, but they're directing several things in motion. They're knowing how to make it, adjustments on the fly. They know, assuming they're making any sense of play calling, they know how to apply resources and things like that. And that is a big chunk of leadership, is the ability to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about it, but this is what we're going to talk about leadership, is because when you find out in the history section that comes up next, or when we meet next time, we're going to explore a little bit about how people examined leadership from the beginning. Because what we'll talk about, I'm not going too deep into it, is that there was a point in time where people started to realize that, some people are leaders, and back in the time of kings, it was just because you have to be born lucky, you have to be a king. But at some point in time, people started to get a little smart and say, there's actually people who are good at this versus not. Right. And so yeah, that's awesome. I like the geek reference on that. See, it's that kind of thing where, like, okay, if you're following the current season of Game of Thrones, we're getting this question of what makes a good leader, what breaks a bad cycle. People start to think about that, and they start to say, well, let's try and figure out what makes a leader. Interestingly, the conversation about what makes a leader really is a conversation of only the last, at best, 150 years. And realistically, it's only the last 30 to 50. I mean, it's like people only started really getting serious about it in the 1950s and 1960s. And I'm going to say it took them a couple of decades to get their legs underneath them. And it's only really been in the last 30 or 40 years we're starting to see, oh, wait, we're kind of dialing in on what works and what doesn't work. And that's why this course gets interesting. And you know, and what you, Chris, what you said about the respect, when you take a look at the video by Sinek, the safety one, he talks a little bit about a scenario that occurred when he was touring a Marine camp, and it was essentially, it was officer training for the Marines. And there's the short version of that story is that what they're doing in the training is they're trying to find individuals who will cultivate the respect of the Marines that they lead, and they're looking for certain behaviors that don't. And what's interesting, the behaviors aren't necessarily about being fearless or being the best shooter or whatever, but it's about accountability and trust and a sense of this person is going to look out for our best interest. And that is a key piece of leadership that we're kind of cultivating up. And so this is why we talk about this stuff, is that it's like there's information to be gleaned, and it's relevant because, first of all, and if you want to be leaders, it kind of helps you build your game up and make a decision. It also helps you decide if you want to do this or not. You know, obviously by the nature of leadership, you know, if you've got 30 people in a room, they're not all going to be leaders, you know, and that's nothing wrong with that. It isn't like that cheesy, you know, like poster that's about, you know, some people just are the fry cooks at McDonald's. It's actually, it is a realistic thing that, you know, there are moments when you will choose to lead, and there'll be moments when you will choose to contribute, because it's what you want to do, what makes sense in that space. And so, knowing what the traits are, what the skills are, if you elect to get involved in leadership, gives you some things to work on and be aware of. And this is why everybody talks about it, because being effective in leadership has a strong correlation to the effectiveness of organizations. And it's like, you got to get right down to the bottom line of it. A team that has a strong leader is substantially more likely to succeed than a team with a weak leader. You know, a weak leader, they may frag the weak leader, but there is a strong correlation to it. And there's also a greater sense of, within the team itself, a greater sense of satisfaction and participation and retention. It's just good leadership makes a lot of that happen. And Derek, you're absolutely right. It's like it's funny when you talk about the idea of a confident, humble leader will draw people to them. There's a specific theory of leadership that completely is based upon this notion that it's something that's called the ripple effect of leadership, where you know, people would get into the leadership game just by behaving this way and saying, hey, look, people will be drawn to me because I am confident, make good decisions, and I do all these behaviors right, and people will be drawn in. And sometimes that plays out in leadership theory as this idea that there is an unspoken contract between leaders and those who are led. And it is interesting. Like at any point in time, someone, you know, you can drop my class, you can quit a team, you can leave a company. You know, it's like in our society, there's very few moments when you are contractually obligated or forced to stay under a leader. The exception would be compulsory military service, which isn't that big. You know, as a percentage of what's going on, it's a pretty small thing. And even there, you know, there's mechanisms whereby if a leader of a unit loses the confidence in the unit, it's very clear and they are rotated out. And that's right. For a short term, you can get away with it. But for the long term, you know, what happens is that people will elect to stick with a leader if the leader does certain things, and those things tend to be, you know, like take the burden of the hard decisions. You know, make selections that seem to move the efforts forward. And that's an important thing. Realize that most people are wired to want to succeed, and they want to be part of things that are successful. That is a part of human nature that we're wired to. It's like there used to be a time when the thinking was humans were innately lazy and didn't want to work and didn't care. That does not tend to be scientifically true. People tend to want to feel successful. When they exhibit behaviors of not caring or lethargy or whatever, there's usually other factors going on. They might not be in the right role. They may not be properly led. You know, they might have health going on, but there's other things happening. Yeah, Yeah, but honestly, or just bad fit. I mean, it's like if you get someone in the wrong kind of like activity, and like when we talk about behavioral profiles, the if you get somebody, let's say you get somebody later, like anybody down in the portal, somebody who's a relator, and you put them in a role that doesn't get them near any kind of human interaction, odds are, they'll be able to force energy into that process for a while, but they'll just start getting It's not that they're lazy, it's just it doesn't match what they're wired to do. And people are wired. Yeah, right. And it's, I know a guy, he used to counsel for UAT, a really brilliant, wonderful human being, I named Taylor. And it's interesting because, what he liked to do was appellate law. And appellate law is a very specific kind of law. It's a research-based law. You looked at documents and you researched the law and you were looking for flaws in the argument that you could then say, hey, yes, this appeal has a basis because there's a flaw in the process proceedings. He loved that. He could have been a trial lawyer, but if it was, he would have hated that job, that life. And when he was here, he didn't enjoy this so much because we were a people place, and he's not a people guy. It's like we were all about people and interactions and stuff like that, and you could just watch over the course of, a couple of years. It's just his performance was tailing off, not because he wasn't an effective human being. It just wasn't what he loved to do, and it wasn't what he was wired for. And so, essentially, leaders do have a great deal of effect on a successful organization, and they make people feel good. So we agree. Like you can say, I'm willing to be led if I feel like you are making our entity, our team, our project, our group better. If the decisions that you make are solid, if you are ethical and responsible. So if you make a bad call, you admit it, and you navigate it, and you're transparent. People will choose to follow a leader even though they make mistakes if the process is transparent. Actually, I'm just like Derek. I like your comment here about that balance of providing protection and not getting caught in bureaucracy. When we get into the section about leading tech workers, that sentence there is key to leading technology individuals. There's a sub-shot of this class. We're going to talk about technology workers in specific. And one of the interesting things that research shows about working with people who are tech is that they want to do their creation. It's almost like, we call it tech, but I think it applies to anybody who has a very specific skill. A scientist, chef, whatever. What they want to do is they want to be able to create what they create. And yes, they recognize they operate within the confines of an organization that's got a lot of rules, but a good leader provides interface on that. They let the people who create do the creation, and they navigate the HR processes, communicate the long-term vision and goals, and that's a really key thing. And actually, some of you, Derek's talking about the commander of the First Sergeant team. It's interesting. I can speak a great deal about American military service. I can talk a bit about the Brits, but leadership. Some of the interesting about the U.S. military is they've spent a profound amount of time over the couple hundred years of existence in studying leadership, and they're really good at it. And so if you ever want to learn models of leadership, just go study what the military does, and you'll find like in a Venn diagram, like about 75% what they talk about makes a ton of sense. There's chunks that like in terms of just what their job is, probably doesn't relate to your life a whole lot, but how they approach team building and what they look for in leaders actually has a lot of translation. And you're right, Chris. It's that notion of a role of leader in a tech space is letting people work on their craft without interruption. It's a lot of the agile models of projects play into this, where that's the role of the Scrum Master. Fundamentally, you boil it down. Why does Scrum Master exist? Scrum Master exists to make sure they have a hierarchical lead, but they're not really the boss. But they're to make sure is like if someone is coding or if someone's building assets, they get into a flow, and the Scrum Master is there to make sure that flow isn't interrupted. You still have to have mechanisms to behave in an organization. That's why you have stand-ups and things like that. But let people be in flow and not have everybody have to navigate all this stuff of business. It's kind of funny, when I work with the program champions here at UAT, one of the funniest conversations I always have with them is they're just like, we're doing meetings and they're like, they're like trying to reach me. I say, well, actually, I'm in, my next open non-meeting moment is in 3 days, and they're just like, I couldn't do that. And I laugh about it because you kind of learn how to do it, but I think it's an interesting dynamic because in their space, part of the way we architect things here is that it doesn't help them to be in all the meetings all the time. Give them 1 meeting a week where I filter down here's the stuff you need to know we're doing as an organization, and then every 2 months we do an all alignment moment in terms of in-service. But beyond that, do your craft. Educate, be S&Ds, do that kind of stuff. And that's an interesting thing to remember with what leadership's role is. All right. So just so you know, we are we're at 7:15. We're almost halfway through the class, and we're on slide 7 of 50. So we're doing great. So I'll move forward a little bit on some of these, but I think that we're kind of playing off this a little bit, and that is, when you think about leadership, I want to pause for a second because when I ask the question that's out of the deck, it's like, how do leaders affect organization? Talk about some of it, but within an organization, how does a different leader and their style affect an organization? If you've ever read a story about CEOs, maybe look at what's going on. Okay, as an example, how many of you have been reading what's going on with Uber right now?
I haven't read into it, but I mean, I've just...
Have you been tracking the CEO change?
No.
Yeah. It's a mess. Well, there's that. It's a mess, although I use them all the time.
No, I'm a Lyft driver. I haven't heard.
Okay. All right. Okay. Outside of class, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you the short version, but then outside of class, just research up what Uber's search of a CEO is doing. Now, the background on it is there's up until recently, their CEO was one of the founders. And one of the things that's interesting about leadership is that sometimes founders sometimes have to leave an organization when they hit a certain state because there's a big difference between what a company needs in its early phases than what it needs as it gets really big. And so sometimes you find founder leaders leave an organization because they're wired for founding and building. That's it. He brought him to the next level, and he brought some certain traits. So a lot of times, and you see this especially in bigger companies, is that leaders bring a flavor. Organizations and teams inexorably take on aspects of their leaders. And in fact, you want that. That's when we say things with a strong leader. A strong leader imbues culture and priorities on an organization. Usually, those are things that you bring in as a person. And you see this with coaches sometimes. Any of you follow college football? Just ASU. Okay. Yes. Good. Thank goodness. Okay. It's when you see this in football quite a bit. The difference between what kind of coach works well with new players versus senior players, or the kind of coach that like sometimes you'll see, this is true of any coaching, but I watch college a lot more, I watch other sports, that it takes a different person, since Lauren talks about ASU, like Todd Graham was brought to ASU because ASU had lost its way, it was off in the wilderness, and you needed someone to get us reoriented on a track to be, to get the ASU football team on track to be competitive at the top tier. Yeah. Right, they were Pac-12. They're in a conference that's getting tougher, and they were drifting. Todd Graham comes in, and he's all about discipline and enthusiasm. He's got a whole set of skills that affect the program that move it from A to B. Now, is that the same thing as being the coach of Bama? A storied program that already gets great recruits and already has all that kind of stuff. But they it's a different kind of a leader that takes a team and says, okay, we're going to be in that top quintile of performance. That's a different mission. And so you get different kinds of leaders. And I think what the reason this is a long around the horn, I guess, to say that leaders rub off on their entities. And that's important because as we talk about you as leaders, something you have to do as a leader is to have a good sense of what you are. Remember I talked about confidence before. One of the things that's interesting about leadership is that you have to have enough confidence over time, understand what you are, what you care about, and what you're good at. And no one is good at everything. We can't be. Our personalities are only wired for certain things. And so it's if you know those things, then once
you've been around a million years, you could.
Maybe. I haven't seen anybody like that. Because even like our leaders who are like really have been around, like if you're not a million years, you become like a vampire. You know, you get bored with human existence. Yeah.
Lots of your normal humanity at that point.
But the leaders who are like 60 or 70, they still have what they have. They have a very cultivated sense of what they bring to an organization and what kind of organization they can help. And they tend to find matches for it. So you go back to the Uber thing. What you're going to find with Uber is that they have gone, they've achieved a point of profound success and growth, and now they're tripping over their own feet. And they are grappling with the topic of, this profound growth created some problems in the way they did business. You're seeing everything like wage, how they pay their employees, treatment of women who are in their ranks, things like that. And so it's going to take a leader. If you look at their comments, they just selected someone in the last few days. But leading up to that, the conversation was finding a leader whose capacity and traits and personality and approach would address their weaknesses. And so that's an important thing to think about. Because what you're going to find as a leader is you're going to build your teams in ways that accomplish what you are good at. And you're going to build your teams in ways that you have people in your team who complement you but fill in your holes. Because again, not everybody's good at everything. And so learning to address that is a big piece of leadership thing. And I think we kind of answered, like leaders affect teams because the teams themselves. Lauren, I'm going back to what Lauren said that was really important. And Chris, you were absolutely right. I'm sorry I didn't see it. Yeah, actually, I went back and said, Chris, and you were right. And it's interesting to take a look at what you said. I mean, if you followed ASU for a while, which you might, if the previous coach came from a storied program and was at a retirement phase, and so he was the wrong coach at that moment because he just wanted a performing entity that he could just keep churning, and what was needed at ASU was someone who was actually going to build the program up and move it to another tier. So that's absolutely right. When you build your teams, who you are and what you say and do affects the culture. And that is profound. When you made the comment of people responding, gut check on it, it affects at the level of people listen to what leaders say and they just vibe it. But also, as an example, one of the things that Bill Clinton, when he was president, was known for is he was a really smart guy who would like to have big, deep conversations, and so he was never on time for meetings. And his whole staff and his whole team was sort of known for really smart. They always ran an hour behind schedule, and they were actually a bit messy in their execution because they were really into the smart wonkiness. When W came in after him, W was actually probably not as smart as Bill, but he'd run businesses, and he came in and he was like, no, it's like he had a process. He had a meeting start always on time. It was a blue suit mentality, and his team followed that, and his administration followed it out. You're going to find that if you look at leaders, you will see that how they are will weave their way into the team in subtle ways. People inside their team still are themselves, but you'll see that the values of the leader will rub off on the team, and that's good and bad. It does require, and this is a really key piece, that as you cultivate your leadership skills, you need to be aware that what you do is going to get it's going to be communicated, even a body language thing, and it's a bit exhausting. It's one thing about leadership that is hard, is that if you talk to senior leadership, what they'll often say is that it gets wearing because you don't get to be off stage around your teams, your organization. And if you get to senior leadership and you're in the community, you don't get to be off stage, you know, and because what you have to be aware of is that what you say and do communicates, and that's the idea of your personal brand as a leader becomes a big deal, because while it is wearing, it's powerful, you know, and you know, if you say, no, you know, Q, your personal brand is, you know, I'm about entrepreneurial ideas. This is what I'm about. And you're always talking about it, and you dress like an entrepreneurial guy, and you're always, the people around you will pick up on it, and they will do things like that, unless you specifically tell them not to. And so, you know, it is, it's a key thing we're going to go into more depth on. And you're right, Derek. Having an adaptable team is incredible. But I'm also going to say that, interestingly, it's also just human nature. It's also sort of why whenever you see leaders change out, you'll usually see a lot of people leave. And it isn't because of petulance. It's because some folks, you know, like over time as a leader, when you build your team and your resources, you will either inadvertently or overtly is better, you will set a culture and you will hire for that culture. And so when you leave and somebody else comes in and their culture is radically different, it's going to rub against the grain, and people are going to say, it just feels scratchy, it's not about. If some folks will be adaptable and they transcend, and I personally find those folks fascinating, the folks who can be effective with different cultures and different leadership groups that can travel through that. That's an interesting skill set as a staff person. Yeah, exactly. That's not how we used to do it. Well, the hardest thing, if you're a leader, it's the hardest thing you have to grapple with is when you're coming in and trying to set something, affecting the change on it and how you navigate that, because that phrase is always kicking in. And you know, I know it's really politically charged, and so I'm not going to go deep into it, but it's interesting to look at our current, you know, presidents are always fascinating to look at as a leader because it is like one of the great icons of leadership. And so you have, right now we are, you know, in a situation where we have a president who came in to be a different culture president. You couldn't culturally come across a more different approach to leadership between, you know, President 44 and 45. And so the reactions to that are fascinating, and we're getting a very amplified version of it. I'm going to try, of course, to stay out of like the weeds of reaction to it. But what you can see is that the reaction is profound because they're so distinctly different, both in the the response of other committees, communities like Europe or whatever, and the newspapers and things like that. What would be interesting in a hypothetical situation is that, you know, it'd be interesting to see if a president who has a completely different point of view gets fundamentally different things done. And it's really hard to do because it's very politically charged at the moment. But you know, when you have moments like that, sometimes you see the following leader get things done that the first leader couldn't do just because they have a different toolkit and they're coming at it a different way. And that is, you know, a very interesting thing about leadership that you bring, you know, to your team. It does sometimes require your teams change out underneath you. But it is one of the things, understand that leaders affect the team and the organization, which is why organizations usually have independent boards of directors, because independent board of directors are gauging from afar operationally how does an organization, how's it doing, and they make a call on whether or not the leader, is this leader leading us on a positive trajectory, a negative trajectory, or are we stagnant? And what do you do with that? So, and Derek, sometimes you can't tell up front, or following our current leader will take you, and not so much. And that's the trick. And that's why organizationally, organizations typically have an external board, and that's the question of a board. Individuals have to make that answer, and that goes back to the idea of respect and trust and development. You know, if individuals say, "Hey, yes, I'm behind you. You know, I will continue to follow you," that's cool. But if they don't, then they will individually leave. But it takes some kind of other entity short of a coup, or something like that, or an organization fails and goes bankrupt. It's some entity to make that kind of call. So it's powerful, and it's the same thing applies to individuals. Now, okay, we're at 7:30, and you just dinged. We're going to pivot to a slightly different topic where I want to talk a little bit about the difference between leadership and management. I do want a quick check out of respect for do we need to pause for a few minutes for a bio break? What?
I can go.
You can take a break?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let's take a 5-minute break, everybody, and everybody's going to learn better if they're not distracted. Let's take 5 minutes, and we'll come back and pick this up, and we'll talk about leadership management and how they contrast as we frame the day out. All right. Cheers. We'll see you in a few minutes. I'll leave the camera on. Lindsay, you can when you watch this later, you can fast forward a few minutes. Did you have any summer?
Yeah, it's all right.
All right.
It's hot.
Yeah, let's make it result.
Yep.
There you go. Well, I'll give you an example of it. If you weren't here for it. Did you drive a lot this summer?
Yeah, I drove quite a bit. Non-stop action for me.
Is your company coming along?
Not too much time spent on my company.
school?
Yeah, I mean, I did time on school, work, and driving.
All right. On this side, we're here. I can see Derek. Hey, Chris, when you're back, send us a ping and let us know, and we'll formally start back up again. And Chris has got a ping. All right. Good job, everyone. All right. So, okay, so let's talk about something, because we talk about leadership. There's leadership, and the other term people bat around is management. And it's worth talking through differences between leadership and management. And before I plow ahead in this deck, give me your thoughts. What's the difference between leadership and management? You probably have a pretty good gut sense. Shout it out. Type it out loudly.
Management's kind of more about operations.
Good word. Very good word. About operations, yeah?
If you're managing something, it's like, you know, you set in a system and then you kind of like run it.
Okay. All right. So actually, I'm going to parallel that with something that Chris and Derek just typed in. Like Chris says, leading is about purpose. Managing is managing the purpose. And I think actually that's kind of cool, Chris. I like that because it does. What you're, what I'm reading into what you wrote is that leadership is about setting the purpose. Then you've got somebody who makes sure it executes. And you talk about the operations piece, and that's you think about it in an entity, an organization of any sort. There is a different. Both of them are responsible for oversight and outcomes. That's where the parallel is. Is that they both have things like you want to have happen, and they have you are responsible for others executing. But management sometimes has more of a connotation of you're tracking a process, navigating a process, making sure it executes, putting those pieces in place and going. Whereas leading is more about defining the process. And actually, Derek, you said an interesting thing there. Like Derek's comment is much leadership is participatory and management is more aloof. Give some texture to that. Hit that up. I'm going to kind of hover on that one. That's very indoor. Chalk it up, or however you want to do it. That's interesting.
It'd be easier to talk it. A leader isn't leading unless he's actually with the folks that he's trying to lead, whereas a manager can stay separate from the team and accomplish the tasks that he's supposed to accomplish because, like Chris pointed out, he's managing the purpose. He's not within the purpose itself.
Okay. That's actually really interesting. And sometimes they kind of play with that a little bit. Management is much more about, at some level, about monitoring and accountability. Like sometimes you see the phrase responsibility and accountability associated with management more than with leadership. Now, at some level, leaders are responsible for accountability and responsibility, but I think when you think about it, is a team performing, that feels more like a management word. And I think you tend to land in that kind of space. And some of the things that like words that are often associated with leadership versus management is that when you think about leadership, you are thinking about the direction of an organization, the vision of where we're going. Like when you're thinking about leadership, when you're doing leadership kinds of behaviors, you are establishing direction. You're establishing values, you're establishing culture, it's almost like you're setting what the priorities and important things are, and ultimately you're responsible for the journey getting there.
Yeah.
You're not doing the journey.
A good leader will have, once you get there, he had all the things ready for you.
Okay.
But a manager is the one that's actually executing the way there.
And there's a piece of that I really like what you said, and that is
Bless you.
a dimension. One dimensional difference between
Bless you, baby.
management. It's time. And bless you. Well, bless you. It's time. Leaders, when you said, when people get there, a good leader is prepared the way for what happens next. That's a leadership thing. You're thinking forward in time. A key trait of leadership is you're casting forward and thinking about what the futures look like. And that's a really important part of leadership. Management, you have that, but it's a tighter, maybe tighter time frames, and really you're much more about making sure processes live within operations. And like a way to say it would be that, like, hey, our goal here is to, we're going to make, really great lattes. That's like where we are about making a kick-butt latte. Lattes change the world and make people happy. They give us caffeine. We're a better world of lattes. Okay? And when we get to the land we're making perfect lattes, I'm going to tell you what's coming after lattes. The double chocolate macchiato with the soy whip. That's a leadery kind of thing. Management is like, okay, great. So we got to get to that. All right, how are we going to monitor? What are the steps involved? Now, leaders will get involved. I'm going to copy the slide here. Okay, this next slide is kind of important. Is that right? And there's an interesting thing. If you say that, like, a manager is about tracking to make sure the steps are organized and the obstructions are taken care of, because there's a lot of operational things you got to worry about that a leader may not. There's legal aspects, there's accounting details, a lot of stuff operation you got to take care of.
Well, a lot of leaders are a little bit management.
Keep going, yeah.
And a lot of managers are a little bit leadership.
The slide, when you get over that slide 13, talks about that. There is this little overlap, a little gray space between leadership and management. And you're right, it isn't a clear breakout. And one of the things I've thought about this a lot, and what I will say is that there are places where activities take on both operational importance and strategic importance.
Right.
And that's sort of where managers and leaders tend to, like, you cross-pollinate. You find yourself doing both things. And I think that's a piece of it.
Especially in startup space.
Yeah, especially in startup space.
Yeah, you end up kind of like doing all of it.
Yeah.
At least in the beginning, unless you have a partner.
Yeah, and that's totally true. And actually at that point in time, you are right. You're like, the two of you are like, okay, we got managerial things we got to make sure. We got to make sure that the quality control is right and the business is being done, and we filed the paperwork, and that things are in spec. And the thing I want to remember, I don't want us to lose, is that in this conversation, as a team moves towards a destination, we're making that great cafe latte, we're changing the world, whatever. You're gonna fall outside of spec. The management role is to, like, keep you in lines, keep you in the rails, whereas maybe leaders are about defining the rails. You play it back and forth. In a small entity, maybe you're doing both, but if you were to step back and look at yourself, you might say that these moments like, hey, what I'm doing right now, this fits in my leadership toolkit, this fits in my building my management skills.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference. And here's related to the class.
Yeah, like I'll sit down, like, if I'm doing both roles, say in a little company, I'm just like, well, that's management.
Right.
That's more like finding how that's going to go.
For example, I'll give you an example. A management activity is training somebody how to, let's say you're writing, you're doing code, okay, and you've got a programmer, reviewing a programmer's code and teaching them how to make, how to solve a problem with code or how to keep something from going wonky. That's a management activity.
Sure.
That's what managers do. You're checking to make sure it works right. You're guiding, you're nudging, you're drawing people. That's a manager. So anytime you sit down with a person and you interact something, like a performance base, that's a management. Usually setting accountability, setting the rules of, like, hey, look, in your job, this is the sandbox you're playing in. You can go this far without checking in. These are the rules of your engagement. That's a manager kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. Whereas like the leader kind of thing is, you might get in and say, all right, again, leader, you're setting the culture. You're setting the norm of, like, look, when you train a person, these are the things that are important when you train them on.
Yeah.
Like, this is the stuff that we care about, because we don't have infinite time. We do not have infinite resources. We can't make everything a priority. We can't make every human virtue something that we're going to focus on. To make our company work, I want to focus on A, D, and Z. That's what a leader does. And that's kind of the difference. Again, that's why I talk about the difference between managing is keeping yourself in the rails, leadership is setting the rails. And that's it. I'm going to go back up. All right, I got to back up a little because there's some really good comments here. Okay. Okay. Derek, I love when you're in my class, man, because you quote from the Army Field Manual. That is deeply awesome. Yeah, leadership defined as influencing people, providing purpose, direction, and motivation, while operating to accomplish the mission of improving the organization. That's actually a definition. You're influencing people, you know. And here's what's cool about that statement, Derek, is that if a leader role, you're giving people purpose, and when we get to transformational leadership within the next 3 or 4 classes, this is straight out of what's called transformational leadership. You're giving people a sense of purpose and direction, and you're getting them motivated. That's 3 of the 5 principles that have been like scientifically shown to be keys in leadership, while accomplishing mission and improving what you're doing. That's a killer statement. So Chris, you're in the military as well, then. That's really cool. All right. Oh, 22 years. Outstanding, guys. Yeah, no, and again, this goes back to, that's right, now I remember you, Chris. There we go. I was going to say, I'm glad you didn't say Nancy there. But no, those are some great, great definitions. All right. Okay, leadership management. I'm going to keep moving with it. Okay, I think we've done that. Well, I move on a little bit to this idea, though, of leadership driven with tech. And we're gonna, like, a lot of we talk about leadership is broad. And again, like the things you guys, Derek and Chris pointed out, that is absolutely relevant to mainstream. Again, it's just the mission is different. But those statements would bring to anywhere you could bring it in. Interesting historical piece. The founder of UAT was Air Force, and he was so much of our early culture was set by him just pulling the playbook from Air Force leadership training. He just was like, nope, they got this figured out. This is rock solid. And so in the early years of the organization, you know, it was literally just, all right, here's what the manual says. But with tech, okay, so what's interesting with the last, leadership studies, like from the beginning of leadership studies to the 80s and 90s, it was mostly just general leadership. There's manufacturing and service and things like that. Suddenly we had this thing happen in the late 80s, early 90s, where all of a sudden tech went from being a small percentage of the workforce and GDP to now a dominant player. And in the fallout from that, in the 90s, companies exploded and died because there was something slightly different about the tech workforce from previous workforces, and no one knew how to manage it. So a lot of the conversations about the failure of the dot-com bubble in the 90s, there were stock valuation issues going on, and there certainly were issues with people investing in vapor tech, and investors weren't as smart as they are now about how you stage funding, tech, all that.
They didn't pay attention to their detail, their P's and Q's, and also they weren't as smart about the technology.
Absolutely, and it was
it was like everything made money. So
well, they were looking for unicorns and current technology, but also tech workers have different traits. There are just some things about them that are unique and different that you've got to attend to, And one of them is this idea of tech workers require a filter, and like in the class I'm calling it technology workers. If I was in a different space, I might call it creative class workers, which is actually how the U.S. Department of Labor called it. The creative class workers are folks whose primary job it is to create things. And when I say create, I don't mean manufacturing line, because that's not really creating. That's performing a task. It's truly, if you're dealing with a workforce that no, really, their job is to build things, and build things that are not coming out, they're artisan, they're not coming out of an assembly line. Yeah, like that's a different kind of a personal lead, especially,
More like the architect or the designer aspect, because even those things still have a designer,
Mm-hmm.
someone who designed it.
Mm-hmm.
And those people probably were more like the tech.
Yeah, and you're right. And managing and leading those individuals is just there's nuanced differences. Things like providing filter, also finding ways to prevent them from getting distracted. Like one of the things that we've learned in the last 10 years is that people will get into a groove, they call it flow or whatever, in terms of like their ability to work. And true flow is different from just like if you were to walk down in the kitchen and be a cook, that's not flow. That's like, hey man, I got my recipes, I'm just churning. That's production efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
If you're someone who is creating, there's a moment your brain drops into the creative mode.
Where you're making the recipe.
And we've since done studies on the curve of development for that, and there's a pre-time it takes to get in. And so when you lead tech workers, you have to find ways to not distract them, because if you're going to accomplish your goals and someone spends 30 minutes getting into the production groove and then you pull them out for a random distraction or whatever, then you have to spend another 30 minutes to bring them back in.
So like they're already in the zone and you're like, hey, can I ask you something? And then they
Right. Right. It's a very true. It's a really true. It's a true pattern for people who do that kind of work. And yet at the same time, the tech workers, oftentimes there is a need, the creative need for some playfulness. And so there are some very specific things in terms of leading a tech force. Yeah, exactly, and that's absolutely very true. That you have to learning how to navigate when you're releasing tension creatively and then bringing it back in is a skill set leading and managing the technology. There's also a funny thing with tech workers where creative workers in general, if you're going to lead them, once upon a time people thought that, if I was trained as a leader, just slot me in, I can lead anything. It does not work with creative class tech workers a lot of times. Already it's highly challenging because there is a sense that it goes back to that thing we talked about before, where to choose to be led, you have to have a sense of trust and respect, a sense that the person leading me knows what they're doing and they're going to get us to where we're going to go. If I am a non-programming, if I've never looked at code in my entire life, if my whole world of leadership came from, I led in the nonprofit sector working with social services, and I suddenly found myself leading a programming team, there's a lot of challenges with that team believing that my skill sets are going to help them move forward. Even though there's a lot of translatable skills, they will not have that confidence, and it's highly challenging. And it is more profound there that if I was a manager of a nonprofit and I suddenly went over and became a leader in a investment banking industry, they might go, yeah, fine, he's really strong. He's worked at a high level there. He knows how to lead people. And Those spaces, managers can kind of, you've got to navigate a certain amount of core skills, but it's not like taking somebody out of tech and bringing them into tech.
That's why Blake could go from Silicon Valley to GoDaddy.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And, it's not necessarily the same kind of company or same product, but you got to know tech. And so that is really important. Oh, that's really interesting. So signal, to talk that through, Derek, that's interesting.
I'd frequently see officers from the infantry side of the house where you give a command, you execute a command, and there's no questions. Coming over to the signal side where they say, I want you to lay this network, and there's like a million questions that go into whatever the tech requirements, who needs what, what's the bandwidth here versus there, what systems do we, as soon as you see somebody say why to a signal officer who used to be infantry, their head just spins around because they're like, what do you mean why? There's no why. Just do it.
That's terrific. Yeah. I think Kirsty said it pretty well too. It's like, when you work with tech, you need to understand, there is a sense of understanding what tech is about, where that helps you be effective in putting the resources in the right place. I think it's important because the there's a funny reality. When you lead a tech worker, and this is one of the hardest challenges with managing tech teams. Typical progression rate, you're managing tech teams, you're good at it, you're promoted out into leadership. Okay, great, so I'm going to skill up on leading people, they're going to train me up on it. And those time you spent skilling up on leading people and that set of skills, your entire team has moved forward in terms of their capacity with tech, because tech's evolving and nuanced and deep. And so suddenly you find yourself in a space where they know more than you about the details. And that's the challenge with tech leadership, is you've got to be able to find a way to do what you said, Chris, which is understand how to lead and achieve the outcomes and know enough about the tech so that you're not irrelevant to your team, but be able to let them be the experts in their area. And that is an important distinction with leading a tech team. And I think this is personally true in any kind of job that's a creative job, especially in a situation where the area is evolving and you're letting the people, like you're leading, do the tricky, like the really detailed technical work, even if it's not necessarily tech. You've got to know enough context. Yeah, right, exactly.
As a leader, you've got to allow experts to be experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of so that's a little hard because sometimes that head.
Well, we've got all these experts at our school, they're professors.
Yeah.
They're able to do.
Yes, although it is challenging. It has its moments. It takes a certain personality. But I think something you guys said online is that it's part of the thing is language. Derek, you said a really cool thing. You know enough that your people can't fool you, and that's important, honestly. If you don't know enough of the language and how things work, people are going to BS you. I mean, it's going to happen. And part of that sniff test for that comes from having enough time with it that you can sniff it out. I think in a lot of ways the military, I always thought, is one of those areas where just because of the nature of the culture there, it would be challenging to be, to come from a very civilian-ish job in the military and suddenly be dropped into a leadership role on a, let's say, a combat unit, just because you wouldn't pass a sniff test. Exactly. But yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's actually this whole topic of knowing how to tell when someone's true or saying it right or not is a really interesting one. And there is an important lesson and concept that is a trust and verify kind of a thing. And if we get a chance, we'll get into this later on in the course. But an interesting technique as a leader is, one, don't talk too much. I mean, let people talk, and know when to cut them off, and listen more than you talk. But then also make them, how they say something is do this, nod, and okay, I get it, I understand it. Show me. And there's an interesting technique that people often forget in leadership is they say, okay, great, can you show me? And there's great phrases that you'll hear leaders use a lot of times, okay, it's a funny language phrase. If you ever hear a leader say, help me understand, there's a couple purposes. But one of the purposes of that phrase is, one, you're trying not to get into an argument. But you're actually, the part of that is show me. Show me where you're coming from tangibly so I understand and I can get into it. And so tech, it is different with tech. It is not, it is an area, we're going to spend a whole unit on this, which leads to the next question. Okay, I want to pivot a little bit here before we get into kind of the last phase of some of the operational details, but I want to think about, can anybody be a leader? And just, all right, out of the gate, there is no wrong answer. There is in no book does anyone say, yes, there's no consensus on this answer. Your opinion. Can anybody be a leader?
I believe that anyone can be a leader given enough years.
Okay. Given time?
I think that, though, normally, no. I mean, it's like I can gain a skill set that I don't have if I spend enough time working it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can take a skill that's not a skill or a deficiency, just spend like 20 years.
So your point is, if someone tends to the craft of leadership the way another person might tend to the craft of wood making or guitar playing, they could be a leader.
Yeah, if they spend enough time. And the thing is, that a natural leader won't need to do that.
Okay.
Like a natural player of guitars.
Okay.
It's nature to him.
Okay.
We'll sit down, be able to refine the craft.
All right. Okay. I'm going to flip over to the online side. Derek says, yes, leaders can be natural. They can also be built. Journey can sometimes be more trouble than it's worth, though. All right. Talk that piece through for me, Derek. Why would the journey be more trouble than it's worth?
I think we've all had managers/leaders who arrived at the role due to a good resume, but because they weren't natural to it, they were never truly successful.
Okay. All right.
However, they can, over time, exactly what Q said, over time, they can get there. But sometimes maybe that person's efforts might be better in a different arena.
All right. On that note, do you think, okay, in their headspace, if you've got somebody who's not a natural leader, what has to change in their brain? Their skills are part of it. Is it just skills, or is there something else besides that it has to change in their head to be effective?
Acceptance.
Keep going?
They have to accept the role.
Okay. All right. Okay. And that role has dynamics to it. I mean, we've talked a little bit about, you're on stage, you're an icon, you are sending cues out that others, your presence, whether you like it or not, sets tone. All right. Your absence. There's an interesting thing. Presence. There's an interesting thing about that with leadership. Why don't you go? Talk more about presence.
I think that when a leader's present, there's activity.
Okay.
They're kind of being watched, even if it's not directly. You could walk by at any moment, and absent, there's starts down more.
Okay.
And there's less.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the part where Christopher said that in your own particular some topics I might know I'm completely lost, so I would never be able to lead anyone. But then I guess if you're in a survival situation, there's got to be a leader. If no one takes it, then everyone could die.
That's absolutely true.
So someone has to step up in that respect.
And that's interesting. Okay, you said two things I thought were really kind of cool. I mean, first I'm going to step back a little bit, and you said that the presence thing matters. And I think what's interesting to recognize about that is, let's say you are, a great coder, a great engineer, a great chef, a great artist, a great guitar player. Do you need to be present around your team to do those things? No. And you might actually get used to the fact I have to go pull off in my space and do my deal, to get that done. Leaders don't get that luxury because a big chunk of your leadership role is your presence is actually setting the tone of behavior, expectation, performance. There's that phrase, the whole phrase, the manager are walking around. One of the simplest things you can do as a manager is to just walk around and talk to people, and just by being you and doing your thing, that actually generates a certain amount of alignment in the organization. Or it diffuses questions, it moves things forward. So there's a difference there between leading and doing. Not that one person can do either way, but it's interesting that something in some folks' head, and this goes back to nature can be a leader, is that some may not want to. Not that they couldn't, but there are folks who don't want to be on stage. And when we talk about behavioral profiles, one of the challenges in some people's behavioral profiles is that they are innately, it takes energy for them to put themselves out there. And it's one thing, they could say, yeah, I can do this for a couple of weeks, but for a career, it's like they kill me because they don't want to be out there that way. And sometimes that notion of being a leader by virtue of your presence it's challenging based on how some people are wired. Not that you can't have quiet, thoughtful leaders, you certainly can. And in certain spaces, you can see it done. And I can remember, it's interesting, I remember the founders of the school, the woman who oversaw most of the operations and accounting, very much in this way. And she had a very strong personality and a very good sense of details in the weeds. And she also set a lot of cues, but she was absolutely hated putting herself out there. And she had to team up with somebody else to clear that for her. And so I think it's one of the things to think about. Actually, I'm reading Chris's notes here. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. And I think it goes back to, I think that's what the old spec system is. But I think you make a point there I would tend to agree with is that the term natural leader has a lot of nuances to it. But for purposes right now, what I would say is the notion of natural leader kind of suggests individuals who are comfortable doing the job. You know, that's different than charisma. We'll talk next time about charisma as a separate thing. I think you can have great natural leadership and have no charisma whatsoever. But I do think that if natural means you're someone who takes pleasure and is comfortable in like organizing the big chess pieces, you know, and you're okay having a persona that helps an organization and attuning your persona in ways that help you, I think that works fine. If you aren't, you can do it for short bursts, but over a long period of time, if you don't suddenly find yourself liking it, it is challenging. And the thing I think about along these lines is that, and recognizing now that we are at 8:03, we're not even halfway slides. I'm not keeping you late. Just those of you who have been in my class where this is one of the traits, especially in this class, because there's a lot of great ideas to play with. When you're a leader, something you've got to make sure is you've got to be ready as a leader to take on new ideas and be willing to expose your ideas and yourself to them. This is an important thing. The number of times people talk about, and I think the military talk about this quite a bit, is that what's the difference between a leader or not if someone raised their hand or someone just took a step? And people make a big deal of it, saying, yeah, it's easy, anybody can take a step. Just do, you know, I know a guy once whose description of leadership is really relates to the idea of just be the most persistent person that does 5% more than the rest. You will be a leader because over time attrition will take over and you just do that much more. And they say that little, the person told that story to me once, a very effective leader, and he was being a little self-deprecating on his strategy, and I say, but you know what? The energy that it takes to put yourself out there 5% more than everybody else is huge. You know, it's just, there is a thing inside of people that is just, it takes a certain kind of energy and willingness to be, I'll take the hit. You're not letting yourself mask into the group that say, you know, I'm going to be that is a part of leadership. And if you have to be willing to do that at some level of leadership. The specialist thing. I don't want to go too deep down this because I got some covered. But I've heard that phrase in the private sector as individual contributor, where there's this idea that, you know, in some really nicely refined compensation and organizational development systems, Blizzard Gaming does this very well. They say, look, there are roles for people who grow through the scope and the depth and the impact of their creations, not through the scope and depth of the sections they lead. And you can go quite far. Gosh. That's really funny.
Yeah, there are definitely those people who would rather create them.
Yeah, I think it's a piece of it. And again, the question is, can anybody be a leader, yes or no? I personally think it's a weird statement. It's not a fair question. Yes, of course, anybody can.
But there's still certain skill sets involved, right? So if you tend to be conductive to those skill sets.
Right. Because, for example, leadership requires, you know, you have to be willing to put energy into things that are not related to your product. You're putting your energy into people. You're putting energy into processes, you know, and you're putting energy into design. You know, some folks are like, I don't want to do that. I just want to make my thing. I want to make something.
Right.
You know,
they want to make something.
The other thing that's interesting about leadership is that if you're going to get involved at any length of time, there is a high demand for infusing new ideas and information into your brain, and you really do, to be effective as a leader, it's pretty impossible to stay stagnant. You kind of have to be in kind of a constant growth glide path, and that's fun or annoying, depending on how you're wired. But it's interesting because if you talk to folks who do a lot of leadership, what you find is they're, you know, like you ask what they read, and you're going to hear things like a high percentage of what they read is nonfiction, and it's, you know, it's because they are, you know, constantly trying to learn. And the crazy thing about leadership is you have to be willing to accept your blind spots and be listening to areas of your faults. And that's a more recent learning of leadership, is that, you know, effective leaders create spaces whereby people can say, no, this area here isn't working. And that's hard, because a lot of ego gets tied up with leadership. Like the fact that people who stand forward and say, hey, I'm doing this thing, I'm stepping forward, there's ego associated with that. There's ego associated with position and all that kind of stuff. There's a Sinek in one of his videos talks a bit about the benefits of leadership being get the best meat and the best mate. Ego gets tied to that. But yet to be effective in leadership, you have to get ego less, because otherwise you can't see your blind spots.
Well, that's true, but you know, there's prestige in non-leadership positions.
Yeah. Oh, totally. But what I'm trying to get to this, and we'll talk on it more. You're going to read about it when you read about leadership theory, is that it's very hard if you're in a leadership role. What I mean, when you do it well, you're going to feel it. You know, you get into when you're leading, you're building and you're designing and you're building your perfect, you know, Sin City world, whatever you want to call it, you know, and it's not going to be perfect. But you don't want it. But you have to be willing to hear that. You have to find a way to say, when someone says, "Do you realize this piece right here, it is either a flaw fundamentally, or isn't in step with where where the community is going, where the market's going," and you've got to be willing to let that go and move on to the next thing. That is, there's a slide just blew by that talks about you have to have a certain deal of mental elasticity and plasticity. And what that means essentially is you've got to be flexible in your thought processes.
Flexible, but it's also kind of difficult, because if you just listen to everybody,
there you go,
then you might be led astray.
And that is an interesting point. One of the key things about leadership is, one of the hardest things is simultaneously you have to be good at knowing when to say, this I'm immovable on.
Yeah.
This I can listen to, and knowing when to say and when not to. The thing that makes leadership interesting, you got to be aware of, is that fundamentally, leadership is about people. It's a rare leadership moment that doesn't involve people, and you will inevitably need to lead people who are.
Unless you got an army of computers instead.
That's not leading anymore, you know. It's like it's not.
Sure, it is. Computer, go over there.
Yeah, that is directing. That's what coding. That's what coding is. You know, leading is fundamentally about people, and about leading people who are not, you have very little in common with in terms of your communication preferences and your style preferences. And that's a thing when you say, can anybody be a leader? Well, you can, but part of your game is going to have to be getting really good at navigating people. Because again, at the end of the day, so much of leadership is about, you know, the people you lead they do get to lead if they don't think you're effective. And weirdly enough, in most organizations, it's a rare situation where you can only surround yourself with people who are like you, because the problem with that is sharing values is okay. Everybody needs to share values. But You can share values and be a fundamentally different person.
Bubblehead.
And that's what you need to fill the different roles in an organization and avoid your blind spots. You've got to be good at that. You got to be service perspective, brand, earning trust. I'm covering these slides, big scope, future in mind. There's a piece here that I want to also note of the leadership. That's an important aspect of leadership we haven't talked about yet. But it is wonderfully in a deck that is I've provided for you called, it's the deck that says, it's to Steve Jobs. It's called Leadership Lessons of Steve Jobs. Take a look at that deck. One of the things that Steve Jobs brought to our understanding of leadership is that you have to work at the mile-high level, but you've got to need to get in the details. It doesn't mean you live in the details, doesn't mean you manage the details, but there's something that's interesting about really good leaders is that as they're mentally prioritizing, what works and what doesn't work, and they're moving towards their vision, you've got to be able to look at some of the smallest engineering pieces and know if it's any good or not. It's as an example, a good CEO is like, remember those guys when we were in the startup class, and I had us pause through some accounting things, and we talked about, hey, in accounting, here are a few key metrics you have to be able to watch. It's a great example of that. If you're running a big company, there's no way you can track all the minutia of accounting. You'd be ineffective if you did. But you need to know how a few key financial metrics that make your company work, what those look like, and be able to get in the weeds with those, because those are the things that make or break your organization. Every leadership role has that. 14 keys. 14 keys. We'll probably get back to this.
The slide deck that you were talking about, he illustrates 14 keys.
Okay. It's good to have perception, and having some detailed information helps you generate that perceptiveness.
Yep. All right. Also, in terms of leadership, in this question of can you be a leader or not? There is a truth that to make it work, there's a certain amount of two kinds of intelligence you got to have. I think it's very challenging to be an effective leader if you're not very smart. I mean, use EQ or however you want to, or IQ tests or whatever. But there are so many things you've got to be able to do as a leader that if you're someone who's challenged at working the cash register, it's going to be hard for you to lead intellectually. And it is a weird reality. There's just too much you've got to do. You do not need to be a genius. There have been many, many rock solid, wonderful leaders who are just normal intelligence, but you got to be there. What I think you also have to have fundamentally is a high degree of what's called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a term that Daniel Goleman coined, and I've got some presentations about him. We're going to loop back to him later. It's this idea that, yes, intellectually you've got to be smart to be a leader, but also you need to be able to navigate your emotions and navigate the emotions of each other. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective. Because the nature of leading people is there's going to be moments where it's going to be aggravating. Your emotions are going to get out of whack. You need to know how to mitigate those. You need to know when. When is it appropriate to show high levels of joy, high levels of frustration? When is it important for you to be able to present, because leaders present, for you to present calm? And can you turn that on a switch? And be genuine, not fake. We're not talking about acting. We're talking about genuinely be able to say, nope, I got to be calm. I think the military, by the way, does a really good job of this. That's a big piece of military training. But also, you need to be able to read the emotions of others and look at, and because it affects how you interact with them. If you are naive about the people who you are leading, they are human beings with emotions that move around, and they may or may not be able to turn them on and off as well as you should or you aspire to. So you have to read them and know, are they tired? Are they happy? Are they cranky? Are they in the groove? And you have to respond your leadership style. there's a whole unit we're going to do that's called situational leadership, and it's this fundamental tenet of leadership that was developed, that was discovered actually in the late 60s, early 70s, is that effective leaders modulate what they provide based upon the personalities of the people they lead, their fundamental behavioral profiles, and based upon their emotional states and their training situation, their level of training and the situation they're in. And so this is why I said before that the challenge for leadership is if you're not reasonably smart, that's a lot of variables to navigate. And but to be able to sit there and go, okay, this is where we are right now. That's where this person is. This is what motivates them. This is their development path. Here's the situation. I'm going to modulate the words I use, the kind of instructions I give, my presence, my distance, how I interact with them. And you're constantly doing all that. That's a very challenging set of skills that personally I think like the best leaders spend their entire lives cultivating. And you hear people who really kind of build up the leadership game will say things like, yes, I'm good in these situations, people's states, but I grapple when they go to here. And it's because it takes a lot of work. And again, I go back to the idea, can anybody be a leader? Yes. But you got to get good at this. Yeah, and then when you said, I love what you said before, that you have to choose to train. This is the training. This is what you got to spend time. We're going to cover some of this tonight. And I think that's kind of the end piece of it, is that, anybody could be a leader conceptually. Mm-hmm. Is everyone going to be a leader? No. The same way that not everybody's going to be a guitar player. Can anybody play guitar? Yes, anybody can play guitar.
Spend enough time working it,
learn the rules, and there are rules. This is where the parallel I would say between being an artisan, anything, and a leader. Like, personally, the difference between a leader and a sports performer is, like a sports performer, if you don't have certain physical attributes no matter what you do, you can't pitch. At least not at any meaningful level. Your body gets in the way of you. Leadership isn't that. With the exception of just maybe some outliers in terms of intelligence and emotional capacity. Mainstream, most everybody can play that game. However, there are some specific attributes that you've got to be good at, and you have to constantly improve on to be effective. And that is like the 2-hour version on what the course is all about. Just so you know. And so we're going to wrap up here pretty fast. And actually, here's the interesting thing. Is I've got about, in this deck, you'll see that there is about 18 pages about this course and what we're about. I'm going to hold those back. We're going to get back to them on Monday, because it is currently 8:20. And I couldn't tell if faster we can go tonight, but I want to have a good, thoughtful conversation of what leadership is about tonight, rather than opening with a detailed conversation of the rules of the game. It's kind of like, for those who have my class before, you kind of know a lot of these anyway. So I'm going to close up with this. We'll open up when we get back on next Monday. I'll cover some of this material. We'll go relatively quickly, and we'll go into some of the nuances. But there is one thing you got to know to deal with, and that is the first assignment. If you look into the course, the way this course cadence is set out, 7.5-week course, there's 7 assignments. Most of the assignments are going to fall being due on Mondays. I wanted you to get one thing done out of the gate, because I didn't want you to go, like the media assignment I would give you would take you 10 days to get to. I didn't want you to be that polar in the course. I wanted to give you something that you could engage in what we talked about tonight. And so the first assignment is a lighter one. If you look under discussions, you're going to see on Monday there is an assignment that's called Weekly Reflection Graded What is Leadership? And it is due on the 8th. It's the only time in this class I've got an assignment that's not due on a Monday. And the reason for it is I want you to really got to hop into this first. I don't want you to overthink it. Every other assignment is going to be due on Mondays. But I want you just to hop in, take what we talked about tonight, think about it, and hop in and answer the question. You've got 4 questions to answer in this discussion.
Right. I actually already wrote mine.
That is exactly what I would expect from you. So basically, and the questions are: if you had to choose 3 traits of leadership that you want to be strong at, what are they? We talk about leadership being a bit of a transparent situation. Be transparent. What are the things you want to build? Okay. I want you to give your thoughts about, why do organizations need leaders? I want you to talk about, like, why is it? And that's a build off tonight. So I'll talk about to everybody on Monday. Is I'm not looking for you to parrot what I said. Like I know what I said. I'm looking for you to. I really want everybody's voice on yes, Chris, exactly. I want you to think about what's your take on it. And one of the things I think is awesome about graduate courses versus undergrad. Undergrad is mostly about finding the facts and statements. Grad, I want you to cultivate your voice. I want your voice to be interesting. And so give me your interesting answer to that. Same thing, can anybody be a leader? We've talked about this last 20 minutes. Obviously, you can parrot all what we said, but I want to hear what you think about it. I want you to bring something to the table that is like, this is something, there isn't a wrong answer, except if you just repeat what we just said for the last 20 minutes. Okay?
Is it okay to do the numbered questions and then answer
Yeah.
below? Or do
Yeah,
you want to
fine.
follow on paragraph for each one? Whatever.
Make sure I understand. Okay. Yeah, and this, you'll find for a lot of the, we'll talk about this on Monday. I care more about the substance than the APA-ness. And so, and we'll go into greater detail on this one. What I'm going to be reading, what I'm looking for is we walk out of this class, and then you spend Thursday and Friday hitting the internet, reading some of the resources here, engaging your ideas. I want to try to get you a little engaged in what we're going to get out the next 7 weeks, and that's what I'm here for. I'm not looking for not cookie cutter. And then again, it's like I want you to think about a skill that you want to develop as a part of your game, whether we do it in this class or wherever. If you intend to lead, and just assume you are, you may say, "Not good. I never intend to lead. I like being an individual contributor." Just assume, for purposes of this class, just know your assignments are all going to be very practical assignments after this one. Mm-hmm. Think about if you had something in yourself that you need to say, look, this is a part of me. We talk about things that it takes to be a leader. Here's a part of me. I'm not this. Write about what have I got? What do you have to work through to navigate at your game plan? So write that up. Read the resources that are there. Find a few others, and then post that in the shelf. On Monday, and what you're going to expect from me is that by the time we meet next time, there'll be a lot more resources in the shelf. Believe it or not, they'll just keep filling up and getting fuller and fuller. And there's obviously more resources than I could put in, but I'm going to try to cultivate things for you. And I will have the next 2 assignments fleshed out. There may be I'm not sure if you can see it from your side or not. There may be something kind of pithy for the first, the first 2 big assignments. Give it a couple days. It's going to flesh out by the time you come on Monday. So I think with that being said, we are 8:24, around 4 minutes long. Thank you for being patient with that, and let's call it a night. And of course, all of you reach out to me anytime, any questions, thoughts, comments, whatnot, and have a great weekend. See you later.
One quick question.
Sure.
I'm seeing a different list than Chris just pulled up. He's got different 4 than the weekly reflection that I see on mine.
Okay, what Chris has matches mine, and I got to that by clicking on discussions. Let me check the assignments. Let's see. Let me check it out for assignments. Every place I'm clicking looks like Chris's.
I got to it through both discussions and through assignments, and they both brought up the different list.
I think what's crazy about this, look, when you go to the discussion module, does it, what you should see under discussions is that the only, cheers, let's see. There should only be 2 modules that are visible under discussion: Q&A and weekly reflection. What is leadership?
Yep.
What's funny about this, I changed it. What you might need to do, like if you had opened this by chance up and left it open, I edited this shortly before the class.
Aha.
And so, if for some reason you might have had this open, it may need to be refreshed.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah, try doing a refresh and you can see it. But it is check if Derek, if for some reason you can't find it, just ping me like later on, and I'll see if I can get it pushed to you properly.
Well, I copy and pasted what Chris put in the chat bar, so.
That works totally fine too. And if you post it that way, you'll be fine. Yeah, but that is the correct one.
Nope, it still had the other one. I'll just go with what he pasted.
Yeah, let's go with it. Fine. Yeah. Cool. All right. Man, it's good seeing you again. Have a great night.
Bye.
You are currently the only person in this conference.